This cold email script booked me 147 meetings as an SDR and helped me average 138% of quota without ever missing my number once. But more importantly, it's helped over 350 reps I've coached directly in Outbound OS book thousands of meetings, like Frank, who went from 3 to 12% response rates, or David, who booked multiple billion-dollar companies in his first week using this exact framework. And look, I'm not going to lie, when I first started, I sent 2,000 emails and booked one meeting. It was awful. But once I figured out this system, everything changed. And in this video, I'm breaking down the exact cold email script that works in 2025 and giving you the full framework you can just copy and start using today. So if you're an SDR, BDR, or AE struggling to book meetings through cold email or just not getting the meetings you want, this is the video for you. All right, so before I give you the script, we need to talk about why most cold emails fail, because if you don't understand this, then the script just won't work for you either. Most reps think cold emails about two things: personalization and volume. They think if they mention something random like where someone went to college or reference some LinkedIn person, that's going to get a response. Or if they send 10,000 emails a day, that eventually the numbers will work out. And look, I fell into this trap. When I first started, I was doing exactly that, sending thousands of emails with generic random facts like, hey, so you have this dog, or hey, so you went to the same university. And guess what? Nobody cared. The harsh reality is this: personalization without relevancy is pointless. Your prospects don't care that you looked on their LinkedIn. They care whether you can solve a problem they're actually dealing with right now. And this is where most reps get it completely wrong. They try to be personal instead of trying to be relevant. But another thing most people don't know is only 3% of your total addressable market is actively ready to buy your product at any given time. That means 97% of the people you're emailing just aren't in buying mode. So it isn't your job to convince them to buy, it's your job to educate them and show you understand their world. So when they start to enter that 3%, you're the first person they think of, and you have to make them problem aware before they even think about buying your solution. And this is why the tips framework works, because it's designed to show relevancy at scale, not just random personalization. Okay, so let me break down the exact framework. Now, I call it the tips framework, which stands for trigger, implication, pain, second order consequence, social proof, and solution. And I'm going to work through each component of the email, what this looks like in a real email, and just explain why it actually works. So the first part is your trigger, which is why you're reaching out to this prospect now. The first thing your email needs is a reason to show why you're reaching out to this individual at this moment in time. And this is what separates you from the other 50 generic emails sitting in their inbox. There's tons of different triggers you can use, and you should always try to use one that ties to the problems you solve. For example, at Outbound OS, we help sellers, but also sales teams to book more meetings through cold outbound. So some great triggers for us is if a new sales leader's recently been hired, or if a company has open sales roles, or if a company has just hired multiple SDRs at the same time, because then our positioning of how we can help their reps ramp makes sense. Again, some of the triggers you can use is if someone's recently got promoted internally, if somebody's recently changed jobs, if a company's just gone through a funding round, if they're actively hiring for specific roles, if they've downloaded a resource or engaged with company content, if they've posted on LinkedIn about specific challenges they're running into. But again, the key thing is the trigger has to be relevant to their role, their day-to-day, and it has to be tied to what you do and the solutions you can give to prospects. Now, if someone's just joined as VP of sales, that's a great trigger. And if they've just posted about they're struggling with ramp time for the reps, that's another great trigger. But an awful trigger would be just calling out something off their LinkedIn generically, like where they went to university or where they're based, because it doesn't tie to their day-to-day and it doesn't relate to what I can do to help them with their issues. So again, always make sure to make it specific to their world and their day-to-day. Now, a quick note on subject lines, because this trips up a ton of people and there's no point talking about the trigger if we don't get this right. You should always be trying to keep your subject line short and make it vague. Now, I'm talking like 2 words max, because your subject line needs to work with your first line. When someone sees your email in their inbox, they see subject line, then the first 30 to 40 characters, which is also known as the preview text. If your subject line is too long, it's going to eat into that preview text and they won't see your full trigger. And this is why most people don't get responses even when they have good triggers, because the subject line is so long, they don't even get to see the trigger. Now, again, if I was going to send cold emails for Outbound OS and I'm reaching out about consulting, this could be something like ramp time, team growth, pipeline goals, something that makes the prospect think that this is going to be an internal email and not a cold email that's getting sent to them. Some bad examples of subject lines would be things like 10x your ramp time, or struggling with ramping reps, or if we could ramp your reps faster, would that be worth a chat? Something that instantly tells the prospect that I'm going to be selling to them. Now, once we've got the trigger and subject line, we move into the implication. Now, the point of an implication is to give the context as to why this trigger matters to them. So you've established why you're reaching out, but the next step is to imply what you think may be a priority for them based on that trigger event. Now, this is where you show you understand their world, their day-to-day. You're not asking them, hey, is this a problem? You're making an informed assumption. Now, an example of this is if someone's just hired 5 new AEs, you may say something like, imagine getting them ramped up quickly is a priority. Using hedge words here, things like imagine, curious, thought, because you're not stating a fact. You're planting the seed that this is something they may be thinking about. Now, this is something I originally learned from Josh Braun, where he talks about the poke the bear method. You're not trying to sell them on the problem. You're acknowledging it might exist and giving them space to either confirm or deny it. Once we've done our implication, this is where we move into pain, where we call out the surface level issue, and then we move into second order consequence, which is where we show the cost of not solving this. Now, this is where most reps fail. They lead well with the pain, they state the problem, but they don't show the second order consequence as to why they should fix it. Something like the pain, most companies struggle with ramp time and leave it there. But why should they care? There's a million different things that they could be focused on. What happens if they don't solve it? And this is where we use the framework before, after bridge. Before is where you illustrate someone's current situation. This is where they are right now. Something like most sales leaders struggle to get reps ramped under 5 months. This is only a surface level issue though. The before is where we show the second order consequence. This is the cost of staying the same. Something like the delays caused 65% of teams to miss quota in 2025. Suddenly, the surface level issue of taking other 5 months to ramp reps is now directly correlated to a negative effect on their KPIs, which makes it worth solving. And then we show that after, which is where we can get someone, which is where we talk through social proof, which we'll go into in a minute. But you see the difference there? Instead of just talking about surface level issues, we dig into the issue. We go a level deeper to show why they should care. The key here is to always tie the pain to something that affects them personally, not just the company. Don't think about the company KPIs, think about their individual KPIs. People are always motivated by their internal goals. If you can show how it helps them, they'll book a meeting and justify to the company why it makes sense for the company, but it has to make sense for them first. So if you're talking to an SDR manager, don't start talking about company revenue. Talk about how it's going to help them, help their team to book more meetings, and then they'll justify it to the company. But now we move into social proof, and this is who you've actually helped. So once we've established the problem and shown why it's worth solving, we need to show we've actually helped people solve this before. And this is where social proof comes in. The formula for this is very simple, which is company/person achieve desired outcome in time frame. We have to make it as tangible as possible. Don't just say we helped, explain exactly how and use details to make it real. So a bad example of social proof would be saying something like, we helped a few companies to ramp their reps faster. This is very great and it puts a lot of thought on the prospect. How much faster did they do it? How many reps did they have? Was it a big company? Was it a small company? It leads to more questions than answers. But an example of great social proof would be something like, we helped Gong's reps ramp under 3 months. Now it's specific with who we've helped, the desired outcome, and how quickly we did it for them. If you can, always try to drop a big name. Naming something like Gong or an industry leader is always going to carry more weight than a small company, or even just saying something bland like SaaS companies. If you don't have big names, that's absolutely fine. Just use whatever social proof you do have, but always try to use some sort of metrics to make it real. Again, always make sure that the outcome is the opposite of the pain you've described. Therefore, if your cost of inaction is how slow it is to get someone ramped and how that leads to missing quota, show how you help somebody ramp fast and hit their quotas. Always make sure the social proof is the inverse of the pain you've previously mentioned. The biggest mistake that I see here is people just use irrelevant social proof. They talk about ramp time, but then they mention something completely different like close rates. If it isn't succinct, the story doesn't work. Then we move into the solution, which is how you actually did it. And this is where you briefly mention something about your product. And I mean briefly, like 1 sentence max, something like with our coaching or using our software or using our platform to host everything. Your goal is to not explain your entire product here. Your one goal is to spark enough curiosity that they reply wanting to explore further. And that's where we go through it on the discovery and the demo calls. Think of it like a trailer. You give them a taste, but not the whole film. And the very last part is your soft CTA. The goal is to get a response. You need a call to action, but the key is to make it easy for the prospect to say yes. Don't say book a 30-minute call on my calendar, because that's a ton of friction for anybody who's receiving a message from somebody cold. Make it easy for them to just respond yes. Something like, worth a chat, open to seeing how. Mind if I send you a 2-minute video? You're making it easy for this person to respond, and then you can suggest the call. So again, putting it all together with the tips framework, it looks something like this. Your subject line is a 2-word subject line about the topic looking vague and internal. Then hey nay, lead with the trigger while you're reaching out. Then your implication, what could be a focus for them. Then the surface level pain, what they're dealing with. Then the second order consequence, why that matters. Then the social proof, who you've helped. Then your solution, how you did it. And finally, your soft CTA finishing off to start a conversation. Now, let me show you what this looks like in a real example. So this is an example of a cold email that I would send to outbound OS if I'm reaching out to a company about consulting. So the subject line would be something like ramp time. Hey Sam, looks like you're hiring 4 new AEs for your DC office. Curious how you plan on getting them ramped up quickly in your first 90 days. Most sales leaders struggle to get reps ramped under 5 months with their current process, which means the delays cause 65% of teams to miss their revenue forecast for the year. We help Gong's reps ramp under 3 months and hit over 200% of their forecast by using our coaching to ramp their new reps. Worth a chat. Now, why this works, let's break it down. So leading with the trigger, we're leading with something relevant. I'm not only calling out who they're hiring, but I'm naming the specifics of how many people they're hiring. This shows that it's for them right now. Then I move into the implication, which is what could be a focus for them. I'm not assuming, I'm not telling them it has to be a focus. Things like you must be focused on, you have to have this as a priority. I'm planting the seed so they can have a moment of realization. Then I go into the surface level pain of how long it typically takes to ramp, but that alone isn't worth solving for. Sales leaders have so many things they could focus on, all prospects do, so we have to make it worth solving. Then I move into the second order consequence of how this slow ramp time meant that most teams missed their forecast for the year, so suddenly it's affecting a KPI they care for. Then the social proof, I'm using a big name, talking about how quickly we got them ramped and also how we help them to hit their revenue number. The solution, I briefly mentioned what we do and how we help them get there, and the CTA finishing, making it super easy for someone to say yes. Now this email's 6 lines and that's it. And it gets replies because every single line has a purpose and there's nothing in there for the sake of it. Now, let me show you how I do it different for a different persona, like a finance leader when I was back at Revolut, because the pain is very different depending who you're talking to and what you do. So this one would look something like FX fees. Now, just for a little bit of context, I used to work for a company called Revolut, valued at 100 billion. I was the youngest ever account executive there at 21 years old, and I hit 141%. And this is an example of the cold emails we would send. We would reach out to small businesses to try and get them to switch from their banks to using Revolut as their main business bank. So again, the subject line would be something like FX fees. Hey Mike, notice you've hired a few new employees across Europe, Africa, and the States in the past few months. Curious how you're managing paying them with all the different FX fees. Most UK businesses work with high street banks and often have upwards of 4% FX fees through hidden costs, which means when hiring internationally, they can be paying hundreds of thousands every year in additional fees which they didn't even know about. We helped Deal save $350,000 in 2 months by switching from their previous bank to Revolut. If we could help you save more on your FX, would that be worth a chat? Mind if I send you a quick comparison to see if you're being overcharged? Now, again, the difference is how I change the pain to make it specific to them. To a CFO, they care about revenue, they care about the fees, they care about the specific finances to make sure they're being as efficient as possible. So I'm showing how these hidden fees are affecting things they didn't even consider. And the social proof is very specific to the pains I'm talking about. I'm making it explicitly clear how much I was actually able to save for that person. So now you have the framework. Before you go write your own emails, I just want to run through some of the most common mistakes that I see all the time when I'm reviewing emails, and I do this every single day in Outbound OS. Now, the first one, as I mentioned earlier, is just long subject lines. I can't tell you how many times I see subject lines like quick question about your outbound process or how company name is helping X company scale. Here's what happens. Your subject line is supposed to work with your preview text. When someone looks in their inbox, as I said, they see about 40 to 50 characters total, including your subject line. So hey name and the first line. Now, if your subject line's taking up 30 of those characters, they're not seeing your trigger, they don't see why it's relevant, so they're not going to open your email. So keep it as short as possible. Again, things like FX fees, ramp time, pipeline goals, team growth, that's it. The second one is generic personalization, talking about things that don't relate to your problem. Things like where they went to university, mentioning things like great post. It doesn't really work because it's fake personalization and it doesn't tie to what they go through in their day to day. The only exception to ever use this is in a PS line at the very end of the email to show that it's for that individual, but it has to be something so specific and actually relevant, i.e. maybe they've posted about their favorite team winning on the weekend, then you can use it. But apart from that, don't waste your time and don't waste your opening line especially. The next one is not digging into pain. A lot of reps talk about pain, talk about the surface level issue, but they don't go into why the prospect should care. What happens if I don't fix it? You're calling out the paper cut, but not showing it's over their neck and they're going to bleed to death if they don't apply a bandage. You have to show the impact of leaving that cut open. So instead of something like most teams struggle with ramp, it takes 5 months, it's okay. Why do I need to focus on this? Then I go into how the delays cause most teams to miss quota. Shit, suddenly I need to fix this. See the difference? The next mistake is irrelevant social proof. So again, if you're talking about ramping reps and then you're talking about about close rate, it's not relevant and it just doesn't tie to the pain you've mentioned, so the story falls flat. Where you're talking about their current situation here, then a completely different desired outcome, so the prospect doesn't see how this can actually help them. You have to make the social proof based on the pain you've just mentioned. If they're struggling with pipeline, show how you help someone build more pipeline. If they're struggling with ramp time, show how you help to speed up ramp time. The next mistake is trying to sell in the email. Your goal is not to explain your entire product and all your features. Your goal is to get a response. When they reply, then you can suggest a call where on that call, you'll go into more detail and explain what you do. But as I mentioned, it's more of a trailer, not the full movie. You have to spark enough curiosity for this person to think maybe this is worth solving and give you a response. Then you can take it from there. All right, so you're probably thinking, Aaron, this is pretty good, but how do I actually make this work for my specific offer? So let me just walk you through the core process that we give to all the reps we coach in Outbound OS. The first is to identify your core triggers. You need to figure out what signals tell you that someone may be buying right now. Ask yourself, what changes in their company would make them need my solution? What problems do they face that my product solves? What events or situations could create urgency where my product can help them? For me at Outbound OS, as I've just mentioned, when we're reaching out to companies selling our consulting, we look if they are recently hiring sales reps because it's likely they're going to be focused on training them. If a new sales leader's recently joined, they're probably thinking about how they're going to have an impact. If they have open job roles, they're probably thinking about how they're going to get the new hires ramped up. When I was at Revolut, as I've mentioned, I look for companies that have just expanded internationally because they're probably going to be getting overcharged on FX fees. The key is to write down 3 to 5 triggers that are relevant for your product and your ICP. Don't just copy what you see on LinkedIn. Think about what makes sense for what you sell. The next is to map these 3 to 5 triggers to implications. So for each of these triggers, ask what could this person be focused on with this? So for example, if someone's just hired 5 new AEs, they're probably thinking how they're going to get them ramped up. They're probably thinking how they're going to get them building pipeline as soon as possible. And they're probably thinking how they're going to get them closing revenue in their first few months and not just being on the back burner. You're not guessing randomly. You have to make informed decisions based on the trigger. So spend some time understanding what do your prospects think about and how does that trigger tie to what you solve. The third step is to identify pain points. Now, this is so important. You have to identify what are the most common challenges that your ICP actually faces in their day-to-day. Now, here's the key. You need to tie the pain to a KPI they personally care about. If you're reaching out to an above-the-line sales leader, so a key decision maker like a VP of sales, a CRO, they care about the whole department. Things like the team's quota attainment, pipeline coverage, revenue generated, the key things the whole department has a focus on. But if you're reaching out to an SDR manager, they care about their team's performance, their team's quota attainment, their team's pipeline, not the whole department. So make it specific to the individual, not just some generic surface level messaging. The next part is to gather your social proof. So look on your company website, try to find some resources you have, ideally with some big names you've helped, but look for the real numbers. Like what specific results did you get? Get all of the case studies and match them to the pain points that you've got from the earlier stage. And the last part is to not just write one email and call it a day, write at least 2 to 3 different variations with different triggers, different pain, and use the scientific method to consistently test and iterate this. Scientific method is something we teach in Outbound OS, but effectively it's changing one variable, look at the difference, and then make a decision on whether to double down or change it up. Now, this is exactly what I did when I was an SDR. I had multiple different emails and multiple different triggers, and I started to rotate based on who I was emailing. And the reality is it does take a lot of work, but you will always find a few outliers that you can double down on, and that's going to give you the leverage back on your time. And look, I'm not going to lie, it's not some instant copy paste solution. You can't just take an exact email template and blast it, but you can take our systems to customize it to your offer, your ICP, and your industry. That's what works across the board. Whether you're selling MarTech, cyber, fintech, tools, it doesn't matter. These frameworks work because they're based on how humans make decisions, not based on what you're selling. All right, so let's recap quickly. The tips framework is trigger, why are you reaching out right now? Implication, what may be a priority based on that trigger? Pain, what's the surface level issue? Second order consequence, what happens if they don't change? Social proof, who have you actually helped? Solution, how did you do it? Soft CTA, make it easy to say yes and keep your subject line to 2 words max. Dig into the pain, show that cost of inaction, and use relevant social proof to match it to the pain you've described. And remember, your goal is to get a response, not to sell the products in your emails. Now look, this framework works. I've used it to book over 147 meetings through pure cold outbound, and I've taught it to over 350 reps who've booked thousands more meetings. But if you want help actually implementing this in your role, and you want me to review the sequences you build, and if you want access to the full cold email operating system that we install to all of our clients with how to build initial emails, how to structure follow-ups, how to use scientific method to test and iterate. I've put a link in the description. It's the first one. Click it to book a call with our team, and we're going to guarantee you book at least 50% more meetings in the next 60 days, or we just give you your money back and work with you for free until you get there. We know the system works, but it only works if you do. So if you want to book more meetings, click the link. If not, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.